Hello everyone. Thanks very much for joining us today. We greatly appreciate your time. My name is Nicholas Reid from Reid Corporate, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this investor webinar with Patriot Battery Metals. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to introduce Patriot's President, CEO and Managing Director, Ken Brinsden, who joins us live from Montreal today. Also online from Perth, we're joined by Brad Seward, Vice President, Investor Relations for Australia. Ken is going to provide us with an update on Patriot's activities, in particular the company's 2024 summer-fall work program at its flagship Corvette lithium project in Quebec, the largest new lithium pegmatite resource in the Americas. Patriot has some significant news catalysts pending over the coming weeks and months, including an important resource update in August, so we're looking forward to hearing from Ken on what's in store for the company. This is intended to be an interactive session, so after Ken delivers a brief presentation, we'll take some questions from the audience, and both Ken and Brad will be available to answer your questions. Just a quick reminder to everyone who's tuned in, please use the Q&A tab on your browser to log your questions, which I'll put to Ken following the presentation. For our investor network here in Australia, it's great to welcome Ken back to present to you today. As many of you know, Ken was one of the key driving forces behind the success of Pilbara Minerals, and I'm personally delighted to be working with him again. So, Ken, it's great to see you. Thanks very much for joining us this evening, your time, this morning, our time here in Perth. Look, I'll hand the floor over to you. Welcome, and please tell us where things are at for Patriot.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. Nice to be with you too, and Brad. A pleasure to be with you, for both of us on behalf of Patriot Battery Metals. And ladies and gentlemen, really nice of you to be with us and join us for a discussion about Patriot, our activities, what it is that we're excited about, and what we hope to deliver in the coming months and years. I'm going to use about 20 minutes worth of discussion or presentation materials. Focus on Corvette, exploration and resource development initiatives. So looking forward to future growth in the Corvette resource. We're going to talk about the CV5 base case, what that means, where we're up to, and where we expect to take the project over time. That'll be a little bit of a deep dive into approvals and also the important relationship with the Cree in the James Bay region in Quebec. And I'm going to close out with some fresh market commentary and perhaps a couple of key points about what might motivate markets, understanding that it's obviously a difficult time for equity investors. But before I launch into all things Corvette and the progress of our projects, I'm going to offer a huge vote of thanks to Blair Way. This morning we've announced that Blair will be stepping down in his executive duties at Patriot and fulfilling his task with Patriot as a non-executive director. And for those of you that have been following Patriot over quite some years now, in fact, roughly 4.5 years, you'll come to appreciate how much value was added by Blair in the period of time he was intimately involved in the company's activities. An amazing package of land was pulled together between him and Darren, a series of deals in often difficult circumstances, making their way through the guts of the COVID outbreak and all the difficulties that emerged there to continue to progress the project to become one of the premier lithium development projects globally. And it's a huge vote of thanks that I'm offering on behalf of the board and the management at Patriot for all that time, dedication, and consistent effort that Blair put in over those years. We really appreciate it, and good on you, Blair, for what it is that you've achieved with Patriot. We really appreciate it. Okay, let's launch into Patriot. So for those of you that may not be familiar with the backstory, somehow new to Patriot, you need to know that we have got one of the premier projects globally. Amazing exploration potential. We own the project 100%. We're really well funded to progress the project, but in particular, the combination of exploration and resource development, having just recently raised $75 million through the Canadian flow-through shares scheme. And I want to say that we've got a disciplined approach to the combination of exploration and development. And that's something that you're going to hear me come back to during the course of the presentation portion this evening. There is more than one stream in the Patriot portfolio because we control a huge chunk of very, very prospective greenstone belt, so plenty of exploration potential. But at the same time, in the CV5 discovery, we've got an amazing development project that we're looking forward to demonstrating its potential to all those that are paying attention in the lithium world. If I didn't mention it, Corvette's in the James Bay region of Quebec. And it's here that Blair and Darren secured an amazing package of ground. There's about 45 to 50 kilometres of contiguous greenstone belt that's already been proven to be highly prospective. And that all culminated in the maiden resource announced in August last year. A top 10 resource globally. This is, bear in mind, just the first resource, and already the largest in the Americas. Now, I want to say that there is not any other project really, at least not of recent times, that has had such an impressive start. And the reason it has such an impressive start is because it is the best geology. Blair and Darren were moving when no one else was paying attention in central Quebec, in this area being the James Bay region adjacent to the Trans-Taga Highway. And as a result, they were able to stitch together the key ground. So it should not surprise anyone. It shouldn't surprise anyone that we are making major discoveries. So that all culminates with the maiden resource that I indicated at CV5. But recently is expanded into drilling at CV13, where not only are we on to likely an increase in the footprint of mineralisation, but also new high-grade zones. So I'll come back to the exploration potential at CV13 and ultimately where we expect to take that. So in summary, from an exploration point of view, plenty to follow up on. Additional resource at CV5, I don't think anyone would doubt that. New resource at CV13, but it's highly likely that there is going to be more discoveries as a result of the potential in that ground. So yeah, really important position and well spotted by Blair and Darren historically. So at CV13, we're onto a new discovery there where we've termed it the Vega Zone after the Nova Zone in CV5, a very, very high-grade subset of the CV5 resource. And at CV13, we're onto another high-grade zone. So already some significant intercepts there. We've highlighted about 35 metres at nearly 3% lithia, but with a few more assays to come. And now the drill's working again. So we've restarted with drilling in the summer program, post the goose break, following the winter program, and we're looking forward to demonstrating the potential in what might exist both north of CV13, where we've made this discovery, but also interconnection between CV13 and CV5, which looks highly prospective. And we're going to try and highlight this by showing some of the regional basically the regional potential, if you like, that sits between CV13 and CV5. So this is a key area where we expect to undertake resource development. And what we mean by that is basically growth in the resource. But in particular, the potential to expand these high-grade zones. The high-grade zones are something I'm going to come back to as we think about the development of the project, because of course, they're also very, very important for the potential future operation that might yet exist at Corvette. So at CV13, the guys stretched the drilling north at the end of the winter program, and it was testing the extension of CV13 undercover. And in the process, we've uncovered, if you like, the high-grade Vega zone. Now, the very fact that it's north of CV13, that's important because that basically tells us that there's something to be honoured, if you like, by the geophysics that's shown in this diagram. and it tells us a bit about what we should chase as we work our way to the northeast. So on your picture there on the screen, to the right and up from CV13 in the direction of CV5. It's a really important discovery and one that we're very, very keen to chase up. So, in summary, in exploration, following the winter program into this summer, regional exploration, initially that includes geos on the ground or boots on the ground, lots of mapping, lots of rock chipping, and assessing targets as we continue to work our way through the greenstone belt, determining which targets are the first targets to hit, and then likely later in the summer program, following up those exploration targets. In the shorter term for our drilling, in the first phase of the summer program, it's focused more on that concept of resource development at CV13 and at CV5. And then when I go on to the project, I'll talk a bit more about what's required for the purpose of the feasibility study. But what does it mean? Well, broadly speaking, we are really well funded especially through that recent flow-through funds raised, to continue drilling and to take us through well into the second half of next year, bearing in mind that the flow-through share scheme money, in essence, has to be spent in the ground. So, well funded to continue to flush out the serious potential that exists along the Corvette trend. The mineral resource update, that's coming, and that's going to be in the first couple of weeks of August. What the new resource update will do is demonstrate, fundamentally, an increase in the resource base, as you'd expect, because we have stretched the drilling at CV5, and then we have more drilling at CV13. There'll be a maiden resource at CV13, and there'll be an upgrade in the resource category at CV5 from the indicated category, with a major upgrade to from the inferred category with a major upgrade to the indicated category. And that's important as we consider feeding the feasibility study that's now largely in progress. So lots of exploration potential, lots more to come. As we think about the growth in the resource, yes, there will be some growth, but the majority of the drilling focused on the infill through CV5. And as I alluded to, that's all about the upgrade in the resource that's going to allow the calculation of a future reserve for that CV5 base case. Okay, the second major work stream. So the first major work stream, it's all about exploration and resource development, with plenty more news to come there. The second major work stream is the CV5 base case development. Now here, there has already been lots of activity. So I want to take you through recent infrastructure, the construction of the Shakajawanan camp. Try and say that with a mouthful of marbles. The Shakajawanan camp, I'll come back to the name of the camp when we talk about the Cree. That's new facilities, initially 80 rooms, but with the potential to grow to 150 rooms. And as you work your way back up that pad, that you can see in the photo there, you're moving through expansion facilities for the camp, offices into core storage, up to the mechanical workshop and the drill fitters workshop, and then right at the top of the photo, the helicopter pad. Now, this camp is really important to support lower ongoing costs of exploration and resource development activities, because what it allows us to do is to move all our people basically local to the project. When combined with the access road, which is now complete between the Trans-Taiga Highway and CV5, a class 4 road, so a substantial road equivalent to a logging road. It's about 20 kilometres in length, and it allows all-weather access to CV5. The combination of the camp and the all-weather access road virtually eliminates the use of helicopters, at least to the extent that they're isolated for regional activity as compared to local activity to the CV5 project. Both are significant pieces of infrastructure. They're not to be underestimated, So, for example, the haulage road there, it includes 3 bridges, of which one is a 35-metre boat. So you can imagine what that means in terms of being substantial infrastructure, but long-standing infrastructure for the good of the project for many, many years to come, as we continue to keep exploring and, of course, ultimately heading towards development of the project. Elsewhere in the project, whilst the CV5 and CV13 discoveries are relatively remote, they are not remote from infrastructure. In fact, the entire project in a straight line is only about 17 to 20 kilometres from the Trans-Taiga Highway. We're only about 40 kilometres from the LG4 airport. LG4 being one of the largest dams as part of the Hydro-Quebec scheme. So a combination of power, complementary facilities like LG4 airport, the fact that we now have a camp, and all-weather road access to the Trans Highway, it's all fantastic infrastructure to ultimately leverage a successful future operation. Another thing that we've dwelled on historically, but it's a really important value add to reinforce, and that's the significance of the mineralogy that exists at both CV5 and CV13. Dominant, large-scale crystal structure with obviously sections that are very high grade. All of that translates to relatively simple recovery of the spodumene concentrate. So we're now largely settled in our engineering around DMS-only recovery, and that's the base case for development in the upcoming PEA and feasibility study. Now on to the approvals process. Clearly, approvals is a really important, and it's actually the critical path for the development of just about every mining project globally. And of course, that's equally true with our project. But what we have is the combined benefit of Quebec and the James Bay region. Now, the reason this location is about as good as it gets in Canada, but arguably potentially globally, is that the constructive process that's been established for the interplay between the Cree Nation, basically the First Nations in the James Bay region, and how they interact with the province of Quebec for the purpose of project development. Land use principles were all locked down through the signing of a treaty in the mid-70s. The treaty was really important to give the Cree prominence for development in their area, but to also have them sitting at the same table. This is a really important initiative, and one that I think is very, very constructive to the process of approvals. Well-defined land use, well-defined principles for approval, and great leadership amongst the Cree. All of that combines to strength in the process and ultimately giving confidence to the proponent, being in this case Patriot, but also confidence to the Cree and the province of Quebec about a joint process that facilitates the responsible development in the James Bay region. So for all those reasons, I've been won over, and arguably, I think there's lessons to be learned in Australia about how some of this has been established and the benefits that have been derived for all parties. So yeah, it's one to watch, and we're confident in this process. So here we are thinking about the James Bay region. There's more information in our presentation, which is lodged online. The provincial assessment process, it's a joint process between the Cree and the province of Quebec. That's the strength in the system I just described. But at a federal level, there's also the progress of approvals that relate to water and the definition of water impacts. That runs in parallel to the provincial and Cree process. So that's a broad outline that I'll come back to. Where are we at? Again, full credit to Blair. Blair got onto baseline work very, very early in the discovery at Corvette, knowing he was onto something important. So good on him for doing that. You cannot win this time back. You need multiple years of surveys to progress your environmental and social impact assessment. And we are now well into the process, 2.5 seasons in. In fact, normally they would be about 2 seasons. So we're 2.5 seasons in. with bits and pieces to go, but none of which represents a barrier to progress of the ESIA. So identified there are some of the key contributors, the studies that are involved in progressing your ESIA, and we are now well into that process. Another important piece of process and progress in Patriot's world is engagement with the Cree. We are really proud and happy to be working with the Cree. Our team has done an amazing job, and again, I put Blair and Darren in that category from the early days, getting stuck right into early engagement and constant engagement. So our team is up in Chisasibi every 6 weeks, and they've now done multiple engagement sessions, formal engagement sessions, where we're capturing data from the community, we're answering queries, and we're following up. And in fact, one of those pieces of follow-up was actually a request by the community and the tallyman to name the camp, hence the name Shakajawanan. Now, if Canadians and the rest of the world can get used to Saskatchewan, I'm pretty confident we can all get used to Shakajawanan. But even more important than that, it inspires a conversation about what it means to engage with the Cree and their culture. So what does Shakajawanan mean? Well, it means climbing a hill or a mountain, or mountains, as is the case at Shakajawanan. Multiple mountains. They're shown there in the photo, and they largely sit adjacent, and the photo behind me, they sit adjacent to the camp location and the Trans-Taga Highway. So a prominent feature locally, well north of our project, but one that's important to the Cree and to the tallyman. So we're really happy to take on that name. In addition to engagement with the Cree at Chisasibi, we're close to the community of Mistissini, so engagement goes on there. But to be clear, all of our project exploration and planned infrastructure, and even actually future planned exploration, is clearly on the Chisasibi communities region. But that doesn't stop us engaging with the other key Cree communities, in our case, being Mistissini and Waminji. So all of that engagement, an important part of Patriot's objectives, and something that we really look forward to and enjoy. So we continue to drill. There'll be exploration, there'll be resource development, there'll be lots and lots of community engagement. There's no two ways about it. And we're going to see all that progress in good order. And then lastly, we're progressing to the development of CV5. Now, I've jumped ahead in one key slide. I'm going to go back to it. It relates to the progress of the rest of the project elements. So my apologies. Here we've outlined the key steps that have either been completed or are underway for the future production, the potential in future production at Corvette. And you can see we've made a good start. I've mentioned the progress of community engagement, of course, but also project works, and in particular the environmental studies. They're all well underway and now will form key contributions to our ESIA documentation. But in parallel, we're now into the economic studies, and the first of those that will come out is the PEA, the Preliminary Economic Assessment, or in Australian parlance, the scoping study. Now, our engineering studies are broadly well beyond the progress of a PEA or a scoping study, but we've decided to print the PEA basically with a view to satisfying some of the other engagement that's going on inside our business. So you can imagine lots of engagement with government in lots of different locations, but obviously prominently here in Quebec. And one of the first things that they ask for is for the presentation of a PEA. Now, historically, we haven't been able to present a PEA because on the ASX, you require the indicated resource and a majority indicated resource. So once the indicated resource is published, which, as I've alluded to, we expect to do in the first half of August, then shortly thereafter, we will present the PEA or the scoping study. And it'll outline the combination of production targets, mine life, target mine life, feed rates in the plant, economic analysis, including CapEx and OpEx. So all of those things will come. And in parallel, we're continuing with the feasibility study. It would be remiss of me not to mention another series of important additions to our team. As much as we're losing Blair from a full-time executive duties point of view, we've now gained John Drapack and Catherine Moffat. John being our studies director or director studies, and Catherine being our director environment, both of whom are key drivers for the progress of the works I just described. In the case of John, the combination of the PEA and the feasibility study. In the case of Catherine, under Alex, for those of you that might have met Alex, you might have met her in Australia when she was there recently. They're continuing to drive the process and the work behind the ESIA. So we're welcoming them to the team, and fantastic additions to continue to bolster our local resources. Moving forward, we go into the COMEC and COMEX deliberation. Ultimately, COMEX opines on our project. That's the joint sitting of the CRE, and that's the culmination of the project approval process, the joint sitting of CRE representatives and the provincial Quebec resident personnel. And in parallel, we would have largely made our way through the IBA negotiation. And at that time, you commence construction. The implication of all that is that we're into commissioning and first production by the end of 2028. But again, the detail will come with the progress of our PEA. Okay, moving on. A couple of comments around the market. Now, I appreciate it's a really difficult time for equity markets, but I have to say it runs in stark contrast to the conversations that are actually going on inside the industry. So inside the lithium raw materials industry and the obvious connections that happen downstream, chemicals, cell making, and even car making. And it's based on the theme that as much as the market is ordinary today, at least from a Chinese pricing point of view, there is huge construction underway of future gigafactory production. Here's one example. So I'm showing you our representation of plants either in production, under construction, or planned in the next year or two. But the US is just one, because basically you could take that picture and you could say the same thing is happening in Europe. The same thing is happening in China. There is gigafactories popping up everywhere because the lithium-ion battery platform is the rechargeable battery platform of choice, and it likely will be for a generation. That's because that technology has a long way to go to continue to improve. Therefore, costs are coming down. And this is where China has had a really important part to play. So let me share you two streams of thought about where China's at. China, in effect, overbuilt lithium iron phosphate capacity in the period between, let's say, 2018 and 2022. And as a result, they had stocks. They were sitting on stocks. Now, it pulled a lot of demand through lithium raw material demand through the system. And that's what motivated the price spike that you saw in 2022 and 2023. But they've been through the process of destocking. An important outcome and something that should not be underestimated by anyone really, whether you're an investor or an analyst in the industry, is just how cheap those cells have become in China. This is a key driver to market growth. Cells in China, at least in the LFP category, lithium iron phosphate batteries, are now in the range of about $50 to $60 a kilowatt hour. That is about half where the industry thought they would be just as recently as a couple of years ago. The speed with which those cells have come down implies that the application in the market is going to be multifold, basically, beyond where it was just 3 or 4 years ago, because those cheaper cells find new markets, and an obvious new market for those cheap cells is static energy storage. Static energy storage of LFP cells is going to motivate mass rollouts of lithium-ion battery static energy storage. Just have a look at what's happening with respect to home battery costs, especially if you've priced a BYD one recently. I have, and I can assure you their cost has just about halved in a very short period of time, less than probably 3 or 4 years. Have a look at Tesla's results from last night. Their static energy storage business is up 160% compared to the same time last year. And I think there's a good chance that it's motivated by the very, very low cost of cells. Second thing, key point to note about what's happening in the market today. China did a really good job of inspiring pretty ordinary lithium raw material capacity in the market. So domestic supplies from China, low-grade lepidolites, and a lot of African supply, some of which is pretty ordinary as well, and universally higher cost than historical norms. The reason I'm sharing that with you is, yes, it's part of China's solution to lower the cost of their chemicals, but today it's not cost effective. And I can assure you, there is nobody in China that is feeling comfortable about the cost of some of that raw material supply. It has built out the right-hand side of the cost curve. Ask yourself this one key question. If China has been so successful in motivating lithium raw material supply, why is it still the case today that when you're selling spodumene into China, you're capturing pretty much 100% of the margin at a chemical level? If it was really low cost supply, then there is no way that that would be happening. It's a key question that analysts need to ask themselves when they think about raw material supply. Why is it that spodumene suppliers are still capturing 100% of the chemical margin? And I think you'll find a lot of it is to do with subsidised production that's supporting, broadly speaking, lower cost chemicals, but not the lowest cost lithium raw materials, because the right-hand side of the cost curve has been built out. So what does it all mean? Well, I wish I had, I'm going to sort of close shortly and open up the line to questions, but I wish I had, maybe it was $10 now. I wish I had $10 for every time when the market was down that somebody told us at Pilbara Minerals that we were either in the wrong project or the wrong industry. I can assure you this industry has every chance of surprising to the upside for the speed with which the industry moves. And I hope I've given you a couple of key indicators to keep an eye on in respect of what happens next in this industry. It seems clear to me that China hasn't finished yet, and there's a lot more growth to come in the Western world that ultimately Patriot and our Corvette discovery, and in particular the CV5 project, will become a key part of in the near future. And with that, Nick, I've probably overused my time, but I'm going to hand over to you because I'm sure there's going to be some fantastic questions. Thanks, mate.
Thanks very much, Ken. Great presentation. We do have lots and lots of questions, so we'll do our best to get through as many of them as we can. And in the interest of a timely finish, we'll keep this Q&A session to probably around 20 minutes thereabouts. Ken, there's a lot of commentary, and I thought I'd just start with this one. It's obviously been a tough time for equity investors in the lithium space. You've touched on that several times through your presentation, and it does sort of take me back to Pilbara, circa 2018-19, and that period in the cycle. I just thought maybe to address a few of the questions that have come through. For those that may have come into the stock over the last 12 months, and currently, sitting on a loss, what's your perspective of where we're at in this cycle, and maybe how does it compare to what happened back in sort of 18-19? And I guess also, why, in your view, is Patriot a good long-term proposition, given what's happening through this current stage of the lithium cycle?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. In answering this question, I'll differentiate the effect of the China market as compared to where we expect Western markets to go, which is where we would largely think Corvette production is going to sit. So to compare the two cycles, the lowest of the lows in lithium pricing last cycle was roughly the middle of 2020, and spodumene got below US $400 a tonne on a CFR China basis. We've probably already been through the lowest of the low prices. I think that was probably early this year, and that was let's say $850 per tonne on an equivalent basis, so CFR China, and that's double historical lows. And that's important because what that shows you is what's happened to the cost base in the industry in just 3.5 years. Like in 3 years or 3.5 years, the relative price support or cost support, price support has doubled. And, ask yourself, if an industry still has to grow another 3 times roughly between now and 2030, is it conceivable that the cost support doubles again to backfill the industry with raw material supply? Well, most certainly. In which case, can you expect projects like Corvette and other key projects globally that have a combination of scale and low strip ratio, low power cost, well located, all that type of thing, to be able to make money through the cycle as compared to a lot of other projects developed globally, but in particular those developed by China, I think, that are building out the right-hand side of the cost curve? I think the answer is yes. It's a fantastic opportunity. And the implication is that those assets are going to be worth, a lot more in the future. China is a really important source of lithium raw material demand, but it's also a major complication in the market because of its volatility. I think one of the developments that emerges in Western supply chains, bearing in mind that the industry is now very focused on alternate supply to China, that is a key imperative from the industry, and you can see that with announcements like what Liontown's made in the last couple of days. Everybody is now focused on what it's going to take to build alternate supply chains to China. My sense is they will be more stable than the China supply chain because Western markets are more motivated by fundamental qualification criteria and the quality in the supply chain as compared to the highly diverse market that's developed in China that can tolerate any grade at any, at any price on any day. They're the sorts of things that contribute to China's volatility as compared to very linear and stable supply chains that we'd expect to emerge in the West.
Thanks, Ken. We'll go to a couple of specific project questions here. An investor asks, outside of CV5 and CV13 as the focus of the summer drilling program, can you let us know which targets you'll be testing with exploration drilling this summer? Any new areas where you will be conducting surface exploration on that you're particularly excited about?
I knew this question would come up, Nick, and I've got to be brutally honest and say I'm sorry, I can't allude to exactly where we're headed with the summer program, partly because it's still subject to work that's actually happening in the field now. But I want to let everyone know that as we know and we start to crystallise those targets, then of course we'll make it more obvious exactly where we're headed. The shorter term focus is on that CV13 and CV5 corridor later in the season as we've got through more of the field work and the geos have spent more time on the ground. Then the priority targets will basically be laid out. So we're getting there, Nick, but we're not quite ready for that yet.
Thanks, Ken. Another question here that relates to the environmental baseline work. Is there anything that has been identified in the early baseline work that will need to be managed in the project development?
No, and again, that's an obvious question. And I've got to point out, we're not early in that work either, Nick. We're now into our third season, and to date we haven't found anything that we wouldn't expect to be readily managed through the combination of the usual things that you would deploy. The usual things that come up in ESIAs are things like alternate fish habitat, building alternate rookeries for fish egg laying, all that sort of stuff is part of our analysis and fully expected by both us as a responsible developer, but equally by the Cree and the provincial government. So we'll work closely with them to ensure that we've established good systems to ensure that those sorts of issues are managed. If the question was a little bit more explicit, is there a weird animal or a weird fish or a a weird piece of fauna. No, we have not discovered something that would be considered to be out of the ordinary and therefore represent a practical obstruction to the continued development of the project.
Thanks, Ken. There's a question here about so the announcement about the Albemarle relationship, strategic partnership. Are you in conversations or discussions with other potential strategic partners or suitors following that announcement?
I hope it doesn't come as a surprise when I say that there is lots of engagement going on in the industry, which includes Patriot, about where to take the future of Western supply chains. Now, a really obvious example, and I'm really glad that Liontown's had success with LG Energy Solutions, because it's just another data point to how active the industry is in sorting out this question of alternate supply to China. And that's exactly our objective. Basically, that we for the long-term future of the Corvette project and for Patriot's growth, we fully expect to be one of the key projects that supports the new chemical supply chain for North America and Europe. And the good news is there is plenty of counterparties, including Albemarle, by the way, who are ultimately looking to achieve exactly that same aim. So there should not be any surprise that those conversations are going on.
Thanks, Ken. I'll just ask a couple more online and then we might throw to Brad. I believe he's got a couple of email questions, but before we go to him, I'll just wrap up a few more online questions here. You gave some pretty compelling reasons there for why you do see the market turning. Are you willing to put any kind of time frame on it in terms of when investors might be able to see some relief in the lithium price?
Well, for the China watchers, you'd appreciate that actually from a lithium raw material demand point of view, it's pretty much been good news. And what that indicates to me is that the supply chain is still active in China. They can only go slow or destock for so long. And perhaps I'd add another layer to that, and they can only subsidise low grade and lower profile projects for so long before they'll come back to market and look to regrow their stock. So I feel like that's coming, and we should be optimistic that ultimately that's what China has to achieve. So that's part one. And then part two is actually really it's about the Western world and where that ultimately goes. It's remarkable to me, actually, that we've ended up in this situation in the Western world, just how little product is actually IRA compliant. If you go through basically the list of lithium raw material supply globally, you will find a very, very small proportion of it actually satisfies the IRA constraints. And this has the industry, so that and geopolitical risk in the China supply chain has industry very, very focused at this point in time. So I think with those two things in play, what you're going to ultimately see is more sophisticated deals than perhaps have been done historically, and good on Liontown for their recent success, because that's exactly what needs to happen through Western supply chains to change the game. Good projects are going to be the West's key lever to success in value-added lithium products. China's pretty much dominated the game in the chemicals piece, but they've got, in majority, there are of course exceptions, but in majority they've got a pretty poor quality supply base going in there. So in the end, the West is going to have to support the good projects that ultimately lever into value-added chemicals for the future of the industry, and we think that fits our time frame. So we don't necessarily have to be concerned about China's price today. As painful as it is, it doesn't really represent the future of the industry. The industry can't be sustained at today's price and it won't grow. So of course there's going to be a change. It's just a question of when. I'd like to think that that's sooner rather than later.
Thanks, Ken. Brad, might throw over to you. I know you had a couple of email questions.
I certainly did. Thank you very much, Nick. Just a couple of questions that haven't now been answered, I think, with your discussions earlier, Ken. So firstly, just maybe a specific one around the dealings with the Cree and what trap lines the project sits on. I've got a couple of questions around that. Are you able to just confirm what trap lines the project sits on, and maybe the nature of the agreements and the nature of the discussions that we've had with different sort of portions of the Cree Nation? And there's just one more question after that.
Okay, yeah, great. Yeah, so in respect of Corvette, the main trend, it sits within trap line 39, which sits wholly within the Chisasibi community of the Cree Nation. So for background, for those of you that may not be familiar with the James Bay region, the Cree Nation is made up of 9 communities, of which Chisasibi is one, of which trapline 39 sits within the Chisasibi community. And the whole of our project sits within trapline 39. So to be clear, the whole project is within the Chisasibi community. Now, having said that, of course, there's interaction with other communities. So, for example, we're close to Mistissini in the area of CV13. So, of course, we'd want to engage with Mistissini, and we do. We've now had multiple consultation sessions with the community down there, and with Wiminji. From a haulage point of view, we look in the first instance to using the Trans-Taiga Highway going west to the Billy Diamond Highway going south to Matagami, where we'll intersect the rail. And then once you're on the rail, you can pretty much go anywhere you want to. Just for reference, for future reference, in the process of developing our PEA, we're working on the principle that our product delivered FOB at Bécancour. The logic in that model, that would either be the port for shipping somewhere else in the world, maybe North America, but equally it could be a chemical position in Bécancour, and it's delivered to the chemical plant's gate. So FOB Bécancour. But yeah, broader engagement, of course, with Chisasibi, very, very regular there, because that's where our project lives and breathes, but lots of other engagement with the other Cree Nations that about our broader story around the interconnected mine and logistics chain.
That's a really good segue, Ken, just to the next question on a bit of the infrastructure. So had a couple come through just on some work that's being done around the Grand Alliance. So obviously there's plans within the next few decades to build potentially build a multi-user rail line up the western side of James Bay, but also in the near term, the Grand Alliance is looking at building a road between Renard and the Trans-Taiga. Now, is that something that we would look at as a potential way of reducing the transportation cost too? And is that something that's being looked at in the current studies that we've got?
Yep, really good question, Brad, and thanks to those that are submitting them. Yep, so the Grand Alliance, that's an important initiative. That's an initiative between basically the Cree Nation, Inuits, and the province of Quebec, considering the development of the north. And it takes a long-term view about what could be developed to continue to support both communities, development in the north, and the future of the north. And amongst that, yeah, some really important projects under consideration. You've listed a couple of them. Potential in rail in the future, potential in port in the James Bay region, but also the connection to the Renard Diamond Mine Road. Now, we look at that project favourably. That in the event that the Renard Diamond Mine Road was connected, it would have the effect of either splitting or at the very least reducing the total haulage that would come via the Trans-Taiga Highway and then west to the Billy Diamond Highway by going via the Renard Road. So yeah, broadly speaking, we're supportive of such an initiative, at least as considered by the Grand Alliance. So yeah, I think it's incumbent on us to keep the analysis of that project and the discussion amongst the community, but also other potential developers in the area, so that we're constructive, if you like, to the future of that Renard Diamond Mine Connection Road. Just more work to be done there, Brad. It's not the base case, but nonetheless an important piece of the puzzle for future development in central and northern Quebec.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Brad. Ken, look, I think we are heading towards the hour, so I think we should probably start to wrap it up. I might just ask a couple of very quick final ones that have popped up. Does the Vega zone make it into the PEA?
Oh gosh, that's an obvious question too. Sorry, I should have pointed that out. CV13 and the Vega zone are considered next, next beyond the initial development at CV5. And the logic in that is that once you've been through your first approvals, subsequent approvals are not as lengthy or sophisticated necessarily because of the broader study work you've done around the project area. So an important future development, but not part of the base case for CV5. And in any case, we're very confident in CV5. We just see CV13 and the Vega zone as being the icing on the cake.
Excellent. And maybe just one final to wrap things up, Ken, and you could probably just leave us with your big picture thoughts here. I'm going to combine two questions. One was, is this project competitive against South American brines? And also a broader question about how you see lithium pricing longer term, i.e. when this project comes into production, which towards the end of this decade. Do you want to perhaps finish off with some high-level thoughts there?
Yeah. Well, I've always said that the right hard rock projects will compete well with respect to brine, but in particular for the production of lithium hydroxide. So there's a healthy match between the right hard rock projects and lithium hydroxide making their way into high nickel batteries. That's a really competitive position for hard rock. But that doesn't mean we should lose sight of carbonate. And in fact, that's exactly what the Chinese chemical conversion industry does today. They produce a primary hydroxide and then they twist it to carbonate for a couple of $100 a tonne. And that's one of the reasons why you're not likely to see huge disparate pricing differences between the hydroxide and carbonate markets over time. So yes, the right projects, definitely competitive with the brines. The second part to that question, sorry, Nick, I've lost my train of thought. What was
just longer term lithium pricing when you're in production?
Okay, well, again, I'll hark back to my reflections earlier on the call about the right-hand side of the cost curve being built out. This is an area that's been grossly underestimated by I think, most investors and most of the analyst community. China's getting away with it today because they're in effect subsidising their supply chain to protect them from $50,000, $60,000 and $70,000 a tonne chemicals. But the net effect of what they're doing is ultimately to print higher pricing for longer in the long run. That's actually what's happening as China allows capital to flow to projects that well, ultimately may not even deserve it, but they're in the market today. And then potentially starving the market of capital for projects that should actually be developed and ultimately lower the cost curve. So where does all that land? Well, should we not be surprised that spodumene is in the order of $2,500 a tonne and chemicals are $30,000 to $40,000 a tonne? I don't think we should be surprised, Nick. Now, people might very well laugh at me today, but they laughed at me when I said that spodumene was going to $1,000 a tonne in 2020. But that's actually what happened. So let's hope I'm right, Nick. This industry's got a long way to go. It's of course volatile, and I sympathise with everybody's pain that they're feeling today. But the industry as a whole has a long way to go, and I think ultimately a development of a very sophisticated and probably stable industry in the latter part of this decade.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ken. It's always great to hear from you, and as always, well presented and well answered. So, look, thanks very much for your time over there, evening over in Montreal. Thank you also to Brad for joining us here in Perth. And look, thank you to everyone. We do apologise if we didn't get to your questions. Please feel free to reach out to Brad here in Australia or Olivia in North America, and we'll make sure that we get back to you. Thanks very much for joining. A recording will be available later today and will be published also through various social channels, both the companies and Reed Corporates and Resources Rising Stars. And we look forward to hosting Ken again. Ken, thanks for your time.
My pleasure, and thanks to everyone for joining. Good morning and good night.
Thanks everyone for joining.